Yeah, so I play the role of Sergeant Tom Myers, who is from Winnipeg in Canada, and he is one of this batch of Canadians that are asked by the British to go defend Hong Kong, and he, like so many young men, are torn between, he's got this life and family in Canada, and he doesn't want to leave his wife alone. Uh, but at the same time, you're hearing of all these these stories coming from Europe of this great war that people are part of, and I can imagine how you have this responsibility of being a part of that, and then you find out that you're actually not going to Europe at all, but you're going to Hong Kong, and you don't expect any fighting whatsoever. And I remember discussing with Craig, the director, about this, and he told me that that Canadian team that was sent, because the Canadians had already been fighting, but this group that was sent was sort of like the B team, and we didn't want this, like hardcore GI soldier that was like up for anything and that was gonna, defend Hong Kong by himself with a rifle and a grenade. No, this was more about someone that wanted to do the best that he could, with the resources that he could, and felt guilty about leaving his family behind, but felt this sense of duty. And there were a few scenes where I got to explore that. The first time that I arrive and I meet the colonel who's in charge of Hong Kong, and he kind of suggests to me that, we're not up to scratch, and I'm representing all the Canadian soldiers that have just arrived. And we arrive without all our equipment, so we're sort of undertrained, undermanned, under-equipped, and we just in this new land, new climate, and we just have to do the best that we can do. And for me as well, my personal history was I went to a boarding school in England that used to have about 600 boys in the school, and now we're down to 300. And they say that one of the biggest contributors about that was during the Great War and Second World War, every 17, 18-year-old signed up, every single one of them. And our school was one of the highest, they'd all become officers. And so in the First World War, it was those young officers that would be, I don't think sometimes they didn't even, I think they just carried a pistol and a whistle, and they would just charge, and I just hope that everyone's following them. And so they were all shot first. And along the walls of our schools is picture after picture of all these men that died. And I remember thinking, especially you got older, as you got closer to 17, 18, like, would I do that? Would I sign up? And you think, well, if all my friends are, and all the boys that I looked up to went before me, yeah, you would, and you felt that sense of duty. But it was such a different thing, because when you think of the Great War, then you think of the war that happened in Europe. You don't think of what happened in Hong Kong. But growing up here, you are aware of the bunkers, you are aware of these World War II monuments and things like that. But it wasn't until this movie that I really started thinking about, well, where did they come from, and who were these men? And it was such an opportunity, not just to learn about it, but then to have that responsibility of trying to tell the best story that you can. And I get given these beautiful lines when I'm in the Kowloon Cricket Club, where I just say, is that enough to do enough that even if we get killed, at least we'll be remembered, and you just hope that somebody remembers you. And that's what this film is about. This film is us remembering these men, much more than just passing by a monument on the street and giving it a thought, but just to tell a good enough story that you can feel what they're feeling, that these become personal, and that you go through this journey with them. I do think it's a surprise, but when you understand, a bit about the forces that govern Hong Kong, it's kind of reasonable, because, well, who's going to make this film? Is it going to be a British filmmaker, and is it going to be for the very strong British point of view? And that's why one of the things I thought was so impressive about this thing is it comes from a very neutral point of view. You tell Chinese, the local Chinese side, this Canadian story side. That's why I think it's such a good film, because it's so diverse and it's almost so neutral that I think that's what makes it work. Because if it came from a British point of view or Chinese point of view, it'd be just so political, and it would have such an agenda. The thing that I like about this is it's just such a human point of view that you can just leave the politics behind, and you just go through this experience of humans during wartime. So many of the stories, the women that have lost their husbands or lost their families and are still searching, people who had status and all their money's gone or worthless, or they're just desperate for a place to stay, looking for safety. These are all problems that everyone can relate to without political agenda, and I think that's why this one of the reasons why this film works. I wish that more of these films were made so that we could get more of a taste of our history, because Hong Kong's history is so politicized, and you just wish you can just take it out and you can just enjoy some of these great stories that Hong Kong has. I'm amazed as a Hong Kong boy. I didn't know about the gin drinkers line. They don't teach this at school. I didn't know that Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day. That should be an easy fact to learn, but I didn't know that. I didn't know it came so closely after Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is such a massive date that everybody knows, but you don't know about this. They don't teach this in Hong Kong schools. So I think it's really a worthwhile story, and I wish someone had done it. I think there's so many more stories yet to tell. Having watched the film, and I wasn't there every day to see all the scenes. I was only there for my parts, or if my part was being shot later that day. It was such a wonderful experience to get to see all these other scenes, to see all these other actors, so many that I didn't get to work with. And it was just wonderful to see their performances. Like I said, George, who played the bellboy, I thought it was his first production, so natural, so easy, just such a beaming smile that's contagious. I thought he was fantastic. Lydia, she was great. I'd never worked with her. I thought she was absolutely fantastic. The concierge, who has this, played by Vermel, he has such a nice, gravitas about him, and his pacing, and he just centers that role. And it's like, okay, we're back at the hotel, here's the concierge, and he has such a nice delivery of just very sensitive to his guests, his surroundings, but with a little bit of cheekiness. When guests ask for, is there a mistress, he's like, I'm gonna be discreet about it, but don't think I don't know what's happening. He's got this really nice balance between sensitivity and humor, and I think that's wonderful. This film has a bit of humor to balance the seriousness. I thought that the maid, played by Ashley Leung, I didn't even know her storyline. I was so captivated, not just by the storyline, but by her performance. And I was really feeling for her in those scenes where she's been looking for her family, and then she finds out that her parents died, and she's still looking for her sister, and she's so torn between knowing what to do. I was so impressed. This being an indie film and being a feature film, the pacing of it. It's not hard, fast action. So much of it relies on the quality of the acting and the storylines of these characters. And not knowing Lydia's storyline and not knowing Ashley's, I was so drawn through the whole movie, wanting to know what happens to them, wanting to know the choices that they make. And I think that really comes down to not just the strength of the writing, but these actresses that pull them off just so well, just so invested in wanting to know what happened to them. The spy in the movie, Mr. Chung, played by Will Chung, I thought he was fantastic as well, because it's not easy to play the bad guy, because you can really overdo it, and you can be such a it almost becomes comical when you're trying to play the bad guy. But he does such a good job of just being this profiteer and just wanting to get his own way without overdoing it, and and it adds that other element to this movie, rather than it's just a parade of good guys. it's, there are these other characters, there are these war profiteers, there are different people in this film. And then the colonel of the British forces in Hong Kong was played by Mike Brooks. And I'd never worked with Mike, but I did know of him because the theatre community in Hong Kong is quite tight. And he has such a different persona when the cameras are rolling. And when you meet him before the scene, he loves to joke about. He's always pinching people's elbow. That's his move. And he really lightens the atmosphere. But then as soon as the camera's rolling, he's just got this great voice, this great authority that was perfect for the role. And it lets you slide into your character so much. It's effortless. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to work with gentlemen such as this. One thing that I always love about indie films like this is it takes a lot to be able to attract actors from a range of backgrounds and ages, because a lot of films, whether they may be like student films or young filmmakers, they don't, you watch a film with a bunch of 20-year-olds, it's you don't have the same gravity and authority. But to get actors like Mike Brooks and Ines Layman's is absolutely wonderful, because they add just so much more. They pull in the performances so much more, and then when you get a scene with them, it just makes it so effortless. I remember one thing that really stands out for me is was watching the performances of the other actors and actresses, and that so many of us sort of went our separate ways to pursue our careers. Lydia went off to Canada. Ashley's now in France. And I was really, having not been in their scenes and watching them for the first time, I was just really blown away by the emotion, the passion with which they told their stories. And it feels like a privilege to be a part of their journey, and you really want this film to do well so that they can do well as a platform for the rest of their career. And when you watch this, and it's the same as when discussing, wow, this story should have been told before. You look at these actresses and their performance, and you're like, wow, they really should be doing something massive by now. They're just so talented. And to think as well that this talent was sort of hidden in Hong Kong, and it's just waiting for the opportunity to find them. I remember one very educational scene for me as both the actor and the character was when Tom meets his colonel in the bunker, and he's being told the situation about the defense of Hong Kong. Now, I think both him and for a lot of foreigners, when they're first introduced to Hong Kong, they immediately think of Hong Kong Island, and they don't realize that Hong Kong is so much more. They have this big peninsula that goes up into Kowloon with these rolling hills. And the colonel points out on the map, he points out this gin drinker's line, and you're very aware of how many men that British forces actually are. And yet they're meant to cover this massive area that's deep into Kowloon with these rolling hills, and you just think, that's an impossible task. And the colonel explains, like, yes, if anyone actually wanted to do anything, it would be quite easy, because we're just too stretched already as it is. And you're basically, I remember thinking about it, it's basically sort of bunker to bunker to bunker. It's not a continuous line connected by these radio wires. And if any of those wires are cut, or if anything goes in between those bunkers, they're just going to go straight through. And that situation is discussed in that scene, because you think, well, what happens if they do break through? What's the fallback plan? And they explain, well, they would just go back to Hong Kong Island and kind of just wait and hope, and you just hope the British Navy's going to come. And that strategy of just wait and pray, it's not a very hopeful one. It's just kind of making the best out of a bad situation. And then when you realize that Tom is that soldier in charge of his section on the front line, you realize the gravity of the situation. And then later he finds out yeah, it's not just a few thousand Japanese troops. There's so many more than they ever expected. And when they attack, it's not just an afterthought. This is a very planned, built-up force that is just looking to sweep the forces, and that's exactly what they did. And I remember one of the big pieces of information that really stood out for me was the Canadian troops arrived on sort of one boat, but their equipment was all coming later, and that boat got massively delayed and actually didn't show up at all by the time Hong Kong was conquered. And so when Tom is being explained the situation about the defense of Hong Kong, and he's explaining the area that he has to protect, which is already very hilly, quite deep, quite jungly. And then there's a line in the movie that I remember really stood out. He's like, well, how do you expect my troops to get back and forth around this area when they don't have cars, they don't have armored cars? What, do you want them to do it on horseback? And that was the reality of the situation. I mean, if the Hong Kongers are watching this, they know about hiking through Hong Kong. Now imagine doing that as a soldier with your equipment, with rifles, expecting to fight maybe in the middle of the night. That gives the situation. This isn't, I think normally when we think about fighting or First World War fighting, you think about the trenches and the bunkers. This was a totally different experience where you just it's such a big area. And I remember feeling this in one of the scenes that we shot. We were in the dark, and one of the guys lost. He dropped something, and it was impossible to find again because you've got this. It's a jungle, and if you're a small force and there's thousands of the enemy around you, that is terrifying because they could be anywhere. It's not a simple thing to defend in that kind of terrain. It is quite terrifying, and we got a little taste of that because we were actually in the same environment that those soldiers were. One element of this film that really stood out, and I remember talking to my mother about it, who watched the film after she watched it as well, and I asked her about the cheongsam dresses, these beautiful dresses that many of the actresses got to wear, and I always wondered, why did that ever stop? Because they're absolutely beautiful and they're so rich in Chinese history, and they just work so well. And I always wondered that, and I thought the film does such a lovely job at showing that, and it's shown off by several of the actresses, and they all looked absolutely fantastic in it. It is definitely costume day as an actor is always very exciting because it helps you just transition into, okay, now this is what the character wears, this is me more into the character, and definitely helps when you're playing a soldier. But I always got a little bit jealous when I saw these actresses in these beautiful cheongsam dresses, and you're just like, I'd love sort of some Asian shirt like that or something like that. They just look absolutely fantastic. One of the big themes about this film is communication, and I learned a lot about the communication styles back then, and it gave me such an interesting perspective. My character, Tom's left his wife back in Winnipeg, and of course he's desperate. You just let your loved ones know about, I've arrived safely. This is what Hong Kong is like. This is the situation. I don't know when I'm going to come back. Hopefully Christmas, which is what he's promised her. And just the situation, everything's safe. Nowadays you can do it by WhatsApp quickly, but I didn't really sink in. You think, okay, they write letters, but it didn't really sink in until I had that scene, and they're like, that if you send a letter, we can't guarantee when it's going to arrive. It might take months. It might be affected by the war because they're traveling by this mail is traveling by ship, and I'd always thought that, okay, yeah, they wrote by letters, but at least you'd write frequently. But when I sort of understood that situation, it just really makes you think, well, if you're only going to be able to get one letter through, what would you say in it, and how would you say it? And you would really want to write the best letter possible. You'd want to make it, a beautiful letter. These aren't just, quick messages just like, hey, I'm arrived. No, you want it to say how you feel, and it's not just it's not sort of poetry for poetry's sake, but it's literally the only communication you're going to have with your loved one that isn't guaranteed for months. And you also understand sort of like the privilege and the sacrifices that these people made during wartime, because okay, maybe yes, telephones, that kind of communication already existed, but if Tom wanted to make a 3-minute call back to Winnipeg, it would cost him a week's salary, and it wasn't guaranteed that she would be able to pick up, or if she did, that she would be able to hear him, and yet you'd have to risk a week's salary just to try. So it really puts things into perspective. It really also makes you grateful for how easy things are nowadays. But again, these are the kind of sacrifices that our ancestors made, and it wasn't that long ago. I think one thing that I really enjoyed as an audience member sitting through this feature film is one of the things that made it flow so nicely are these overarching themes that just work so well. One being, the fact that it's Christmas, which is historically accurate, but as a theme of people coming together, that sort of the best of humanity, of giving and just sharing and wanting the best for each other, opposed by war, which the thing is isn't guaranteed at the beginning of this movie. Everyone thinks that it's going to pass them by. And there's opportunities for several of the characters to leave Hong Kong, to maybe go to Singapore, to go elsewhere. And everyone's sort of hoping that, no, Hong Kong's not going to be touched, Hong Kong's going to be safe, the Japanese are too busy. So there's no guarantee that the war's going to come, like Christmas is. And I think there's several scenes that really stand out, that intensifies in this film. I remember there was this one scene where the concierge, he really wants to do the best that he can, and he wants to help these people. But at the same time, the hotel's being affected, and they just can't take in everyone, so he turns people away. But the closer it gets to Christmas, and the more people get desperate with their money now becoming worthless, with there's less safe places to go, he sort of abandons all thoughts of, okay, forget about profit, we just need to keep people safe, we just need to do what we can do, whatever it is that we can do. And that is something that you feel in all the characters throughout this film, that everyone is just, these are just, they're not these great acts of heroism. They're just normal people just wanting to do the best that they can do. That's what I think makes this film just so relatable to the audience. As an audience member watching it, is you're not watching superheroes pulling off great feats. You're watching humans in situations that you can really relate to, just trying to connect with each other the best that they can in very desperate situations. I thought it was absolutely beautiful, the final scene between the two actresses, where they've both lost so much and all they have is each other, and in an almost very Asian way, where you put a brave face on it, as women, they wear their best dress, and they share these cookies, which is a luxury at the time, and they just and they're there for each other, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the Japanese are going to bust in and capture them, but you just feel like, well, whatever happens, at least they've got each other and they're there for each other, and it's a very moving, made so much more by this music that's being crescendoing into this beautiful moment at that time, and I think it's such a nice, there's these peaks that peak with these themes, and it's absolutely beautiful. So right after that, then you get Tom scene with his daughter, and yeah, you're already so full of emotion at this time. You've gone through so much with all these characters, and then you just think, well, wow, it's not just the characters that have been affected by these themes, by the war. It's all the people that care about them. It's all the people that are left behind, and you're right back to square one. You're open with this soldier, and you're back there in Canada, which is so far away from Hong Kong, right? I think that was one thing that really I thought was absolutely beautiful, was that you're so far transported away from Hong Kong to this snowing place in Canada, and there's this young girl, played by my niece, we got her in for the film. You've got this guy's daughter that he never met, and they still don't know what happened to their dad. Maybe there's a chance he's going to come back. Maybe he got taken to a POW camp, and maybe he's going to be released. And so you just feel like, hey, there's this this mother who still has hope, and then she gets the letter, and that's when she finds out a letter written by these actresses right at that moment, that they still felt this sense of obligation to this woman that they've never met on the other side of the world. They felt this obligation of we still need to tell her what happened to her husband.